Okay, so hi everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of Two Old Psychologists Talking About Stuff. So I'm here with my good friend Ray
Hello, Rich.
and me, Rich. So today we're just going to round up 2025 with a little bit of a review of the year, psychology style. But before we get into that, as always, it's been a little time since I last spoke to you. So what's been going on? What have you noticed?
I made a fresh batch of kimchi, which is a fermented Korean dish of vegetables and cabbage and stuff. And as the name suggests, being fermented, it's both delicious and it absolutely stinks the place out. So one of the things I've noticed, and those close to me have noticed, is the house slightly stinking of decaying vegetables. That's what I've noticed.
You are all about the messing about with nature, aren't you? It's not mushrooms, it's the kimchi.
Glorying in decay, that's what it is.
I bet you've done homebrew, haven't you? But you've tried your hand at beer or wine or something in the past.
In the past, in the distant past, even cider in the kind of very, very traditional way of literally floating yeast on a slice of bread on top of the apple juice to sort of control the dosage. It was horrible.
I knew it.
What about you? What have you been noticing?
Well, I'm kind of feeling loved up today because it was graduation, which is always one of my favourite days of the year. So that the day when we sort of get to give the students their certificates and just see them all, finally get the recognition and reward for all their efforts that they've put in over the year training as CBT therapists. And so the different thing today was that because our course is a postgraduate diploma as opposed to a degree, we've never been allowed to be part of the proper degree congregation, proper graduation in the great hall at the University of Birmingham, the whole sort of full on Harry Potter experience. And this has been a source of consternation and kind of agitation, I think, because the University of Birmingham, like as the country's first civic university, it has a kind of history, not a massive history, but a history of running courses that are perhaps less about research, but they are about training people to do the kind of stuff that society needs. So,
Yeah.
clinical psychologists, cognitive behavior therapists, social workers, teachers, that kind of thing. Some of those courses aren't degrees, and so those people haven't been allowed to graduate in the main hall with everybody else. But this year it was allowed for the first time. There's a policy change. University of Birmingham, being one of those big red brick universities, a little bit traditional, so they've decided to have a change of heart and break from tradition and allow everybody into the big ceremony. And I was a little bit curmudgeonly about it. I was like, don't, if you don't want us to be part of it, then I don't want to be part of it. And I quite liked the little intimate ceremony that we used to do for them. But having said all of that, sat through today and processed through the Great Hall in all of my finery to a brass band playing. Yeah, it was awesome. And
Wow.
I could just see the joy on the families' faces that they got to be part of this big ceremony.
Must have been a lovely feeling. And what kind of cloak were you wearing? Were you wearing something really gothic?
Invisibility. No, I was wearing a very fetching sort of maroon and silver affair.
Ooh.
With my little puffy hat that one gets to wear once you've done a doctorate.
Very nice.
Yeah. And it's the one day in the year where you'll see me wearing a suit. I'm not a particular fan of dressing up smart, and so I do borrow my son's suit for the occasion.
I expect to see photographs. I don't think I've never seen you in a suit, so yeah, I expect to see photos.
I'll tell you what was great as well, that they have this, if I say brass band, in my head, it sort of sounds like a colliery band kind of thing, but it was a brass band, but what they were doing was quite fitting. It felt quite, big and sort of pompous and like, as you would want it to be on an occasion like that. But I don't know what they played when we processed in, but it was pretty sort of majestic. At the end, after the ceremony was declared closed, they played the national anthem, followed by Happy. Who's that by? You know that song?
Oh, the one from Despicable Me by
Is it
Pharrell Williams?
Pharrell Williams, yeah.
Yeah.
They played Happy by Pharrell Williams and then Merry Christmas Everyone by Slade.
Oh, how suitably drummy.
Yeah, exactly. So there can't be many occasions where those 3 tunes would be played in succession. No, it was great, and I stand corrected because I was a bit dubious about the whole thing, but I'm willing to admit that I was wrong.
Very big of you.
Rounding out the year then. So the idea for this episode was just to look back on 2025 and with a few different categories, just pick out certain moments that had captured our attention as being kind of noteworthy, and then maybe just think about what that might tell us about psychology or what psychology might tell us about that. So we've got a few categories, and we're going to start with things from our professional lives. So, Ray, I'm going to ask you for a sort of a moment from 2025 that was all about your professional life. What stands out for you?
Well, I was lucky enough to do a lot of interesting things to do in my professional life. But the one that really came to me was a single kind of workshop training event by a trainer called Rika Kielgaard from Denmark. And she was running a session on self-disclosure in therapy. Okay, so to what extent is it okay, and how best can it be done for it when a therapist chooses to say something about themselves and their life within a therapy session? A lot of traditional psychological therapies, obviously, the sort of traditional sort of psychodynamic, psychoanalytic ones. Part of the whole model is that the therapist stays very blank to have things projected onto them by the client, and that's part of how it works. This form of psychological therapy you and I are involved with, ACT, has a slightly different take on it. The therapist might share their own observations of their own experience under certain circumstances where that's warranted and in the service of what the client might benefit from. What I particularly appreciated about doing this was, although the ideas of this weren't desperately new to me, the opportunity to sit down and really reflect on how it felt to you and run through some things with another person and hear personal reflections from a therapist that you respect made a huge difference compared to just reading some paragraphs that said, we can do this, we'll do this under these circumstances, or don't do that. Actually, it's the experience of kind of going through it and doing it and feeling it was what made the difference to these facts I already kind of knew. And yeah, that was something that really stuck with me this year.
And that was a part of the ACBS conference in Manchester that we kind of trailed with Dawn Johnson a little while back.
Yeah, just about a month ago, was it?
Well, so I hope this doesn't happen all evening, but snap, right? Because my professional moment was going to be that conference as well. I do wonder whether there's a limit to how much our audience can sort of take us just banging on about how great it is to go to a contextual behavioral science
Mm.
conference. And, let's just one more time. So, yeah, that was my professional highlight. I went to 2 conferences this year, one in Poland, one in Manchester, both great. But the one in Manchester, there was something really lovely about this sort of feeling of connection to other people. And I think that was very deliberately baked into the schedule. My one sort of moment I was going to pick as a standout above everything else was absolutely the last thing I thought I would pick, because it was the thing I was most apprehensive about, which this is going to sound really weird, I think, to anyone who thinks, what do therapists get up to at conferences? We had a clowning workshop. And so this was like a full on clown, right? A professional clown who just spent something like an hour and a half with us. And the invitation was to play, I suppose, to clown around, do various exercises and activities which were about just discovering yourself and each other through play, which I guess is just something as adults we don't do very much. And I can't really do it justice in my description of it, but I think there was just something that felt very consistent with the way we work about sort of tuning into a value of connection and then making room for a bunch of discomfort, like, do I look stupid? Am I going to make a fool of myself? Am I going to feel embarrassed? And probably the answer is like yes to all of those things, right? But it was just something really, I don't know, something really wonderful about having the opportunity and permission to just play and kind of discover a part of yourself through play in a way that we just don't normally do as adults.
Mm. As I was at that event with you, absolutely agree with you. I mean, I was convinced I wasn't going to go to it. The actual only reason I ended up going to it was I had to do something in that same room immediately afterwards. I had to be there for some setup stuff. So I ended up going. And yeah, absolutely agree. It was quite an experience. And for me, I think the thing I took from it was it kind of split us off from all of our other assumptions and thoughts about what we were there for and all our usual patterns of thinking, and just set us up with something that was well outside our comfort zone and which we didn't really have many associations with. I'd never been at clowning before. And that kind of like freed you up to do some things differently and notice some things differently, because it wasn't just all connected to very, very familiar stuff. So yeah, it was quite an event, wasn't it?
There is a picture of us at said event, so I wonder, as a reward for our loyal following of people who've been listening to us all year, I wonder if we could make that the thumbnail for this episode.
Why not? I could cope with that being out in the ether.
Walk the walk, right? We're going to practice what we preach and lean into the discomfort of everybody in the world there seeing us
Yeah.
looking stupid. Okay, so that's professional stuff then. So yes, it turns out therapists do very serious, earnest things like discuss pros and cons of self-disclosure, and they fall about at a clowning workshop. Little glimpse behind the curtain there.
So if we were to move on to our next category, and that was a particular moment that was about the news in 2025, what would you pick out from that, Rich?
So this is where I think I forgo my right to enter the United States of America for the next few years, given recent developments about checking people's social media histories. Well, I can't look beyond the election of Donald Trump and then the just about a year we've had now of the Trump administration. Just amazing, really, what's happened in that time. The things we've learned about him as a man, if we didn't know them before, and the way in which the US seems to be sliding into a form of government that's just kind of unrecognizable. It's just sliding into a form of authoritarianism in all sorts of different ways, whether that be having, immigration and customs agents wearing masks and zip tying mothers on the street. I think people think maybe you might look at someone like Barack Obama and think he was a sort of kind and benevolent president, and I'm not saying he wasn't, and he was the kind of deporter in chief. I think, more people were deported on his watch than many other presidents. But the way they've gone about it in this administration is sort of emblematic, I think, of the way they've gone about lots of things in terms of, like weaponizing the Justice Department, renaming the Secretary of Defense as the Secretary of War, just putting themselves on a kind of footing which seems to be alienating all of the previous allies, like the recent national security strategy that came out recently. As an example, the group of nations that had the most criticism of was Europe, where previously you would have had lots of content in there about Russia and China. They barely got a
Yeah.
mention. North Korea didn't get mentioned at all. There was a lot in there about basically inherent sort of criticism of the EU, and that as a liberal democracy, it was sort of a liberal democratic institution. It was too liberal, and we should get rid of it really and go back to nation states. And the sort of implicit support of far right authoritarian parties. I have no idea what it would be like to live there at the moment. I'm glad I'm not living there at the moment. It just seems amazing how quickly an administration can turn a country into something you just don't really recognize anymore. And I
Yeah.
think I suppose the psychological angle for me is that it just feels a bit frightening, and that it feels like it gives permission around the world to all of these other would-be right-wing authoritarian, well, I say would-be politicians, that's the wrong phrase. They're not would-be politicians. They are politicians, but they are kind of would-be governments, aren't they? And, we're seeing that here in this country. There's kind of an emboldening of just lying, being deceitful, almost having no shame. I mean, one of the things you couldn't accuse Trump of hypocrisy, right? Because the man seems to have no kind of moral basis to betray. And so there's just something about the barefacedness of a lot of this very extreme policy decisions that I think even if governments would have made such moves in the past, they would have dressed them up as being something else. And there is no sort of pretense about that. And so I suppose it's things like the kind of soft power, if I could use that expression, that, there's hard power, isn't there? There's just military might. But then there's the kind of soft power that the Americans always seem to be so good at in terms of forging alliances here and there, be that the politics or trade or foreign aid, for
Yeah.
example. But the administration just seems to be saying there is no such thing as soft power. There's just might, and that's it. And that's just this very strange world that we're suddenly living in. And it's just amazing to me how fast it's changed.
It is remarkable, isn't it? And the phrase we hear a lot is saying the quiet part out loud, that some of these tendencies and some of these ambitions have been present there and in lots of other countries for a long time. But the kind of accepted rules of what can and can't be said have forced people to keep certain things undercover or to appear to act and talk and justify things differently. And suddenly that's certainly seems to have gone in that particular setting. And it's very easy, I suppose, in each of the countries we look at, but taking the States, for example, to sort of go with the great man theory of history. I don't mean great as in good here, but very significant individual person who makes everything happen theory of history, which, historians by and large tend to reject, but historically has been the case. And, in the case of Trump, he certainly has made some things happen, and a lot of what we're seeing seems to be in his image. And, a long game has been played, and these structures seem to be set up over a long period of time. And there are many other people there willing to take this project forward with possibly more concentration and more planning. I think for me, that's one of the truly scary bits. If one elderly man allegedly in very poor health ceased to be a part of the picture suddenly one day, I'm not convinced everything would return to normal very quickly.
No, I think that's right. And I think that's the thing that's worrying, isn't it? It's that we seem on a sort of global level to be heading in a direction where it's just okay to behave like that. And it's okay to transgress the norms that have been around for, well, certainly since the Second World War. So, yeah, it all feels a little bit depressing.
Well, one of the many psychology takes on that is, we know one of the things that seems to contribute to trauma and real struggle in adjusting to changes in one's world is when there's a shattering of underlying assumptions. The idea that we have this sometimes called an assumptive world, just probably not even voiced, but underlying ideas that this is, basically a fair world, basically a safe world. At a cognitive level, we wouldn't say, yes, that's true, because we know about all the variations. But the idea is that we kind of carry that with us. Kind of a lot of these assumptions being kind of shattered in front of you. Not just is that traumatizing, it actually can make people freeze and makes it very hard to respond in an organized and effective manner in the face of such complete reversals of what seem to us the norms that apply to some of the basics of how the world should be.
Although the other thing that's fascinating is that there seems to be at least, I mean, time will tell, I guess, but at the moment, like at least sort of 50% of the US population that are just saying, well, there's nothing to see here. Nothing's happening.
Indeed.
Anyway, that's brought the tone down. So what's your moment that you want to take from the news this year?
Well, I suppose I want to take a glimmer, maybe, of hope, or hope for those of us with a certain sort of political background. In the midst of all of this lurch rightwards, including what we've seen in our country, and the sort of anti-migrant sentiments that we've seen. I mean, I came over to visit you a few weeks ago, Rich, and, virtually every lamppost had flags hanging from it. So, a lot of this kind of stuff about. In the middle of it, there's been just these one or two little shoots of other possibilities. And I suppose in the UK, the one that I noticed was the election of a man called Zach Palensky to the leadership of the Green Party. And I think that's interesting. I'm not a great one for thinking a person will change everything, and here comes our saviour. And that's not even a political party I have been a part of. But there's some remarkable things about this situation. So in this era that we're in, we have one of the parties, not a huge number of seats in government, but on a first past the post system, that's not all that unusual. But a party with a caucus of seats, and they've voted somebody who kind of is very much outside the normal mould. So we have a openly Palestine supporting Jewish man who's gay and vegan, whose part of his past is being a hypnotherapist. So, not the usual pattern of things, who is very clear about certain messages that just don't get said so much. In many ways, he's kind of like the anti-Farage. He's kind of like the opposite pole on many things. And although one would, of course, kind of characterize a lot of his policies as of the left, I think the really interesting thing is it's not the left as people have understood it. We're looking at individual policies and ideas rather than some sort of big political caucus of supporters. And these are policies like increasing public ownership of key infrastructure, having it established that these things are run for the people of the country rather than for profit, of seeing wealth inequality as an active source of what's wrong and something to be acted upon to reduce the inequalities between the best off and the worst off. And, the most reassuring thing from my point of view to have heard is being actively positive about immigration. Immigration is a positive force in this country, as it always has been, in an era where negative messages about immigration have entirely dominated, and to the extent that people you wouldn't have expected to have got kind of pulled into that argument. So like the current stance of the Labour Party being more about how tough they're going to be on immigration rather than actually saying these people bring things we need in this country, bring bonus, bring vitality and wealth. So, that's a set of messages we haven't heard for a long time. It does seem to be resonating with a lot of people and giving people perhaps the option to look at things that they really want to happen rather than just who's the least worst of the people in front of us. And all that's about one person. It's also encouraging that, there's at least one high-profile example in the States, Zoran Mamdani, who's been elected mayor of New York, who, not the same person and not quite the same policies, but a lot in common. So that's my kind of highlight, that in the midst of the gloom and darkness, there are one or two shoots that maybe something might be different.
I can't pretend to know an awful lot about Zach Polanski, although I can recommend, if people are interested, he did a interview on Leading, which is a podcast that Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart do. So if anyone's interested in getting the measure of Zach Polanski, that was a good place to go. We'll see. Interesting times ahead. So let's move away from the news and politics to culture. So a cultural moment that stood out for you in 2025.
So my cultural highlight is a book. It's a book by a Korean-American author called Susan Choi. I only ended up reading it because it was nominated for the Booker Prize. So the Booker Prize is kind of like the Oscars for literary fiction, which has been originally published in English language. And every year, with some friends, get together and in the sort of month or so's warning you get, try and read through the 6 finalists. Try and get all the way through all of them. And then on the night that the winner is announced, you can shout at the telly and tell them that they're wrong, because they always are wrong. And they were wrong again this year. Anyway, one of the ways in which they were wrong was they didn't choose flashlight. What's good about this book is it tells an interesting story, things I hadn't heard about. So this was the experience of Korean people originally living in Japan after the Second World War, and their experience as Korea sort of split into two countries, very, very different character. And one of our protagonists then coming across to America and then sort of trying to fit in, find a life. A lot of things happen and they are interesting. That's not particularly why I chose it for this. Within it, one of the characters has a chronic illness, a neurological degenerative disorder. And she is profoundly affected by both physical weakness and energy problems. These are people I've worked with professionally, but also, I've experienced it in my life. I know you have experienced it with people you know in your life, Rich, of people who have to consciously plan what might seem very simple everyday activities, going shopping, how much you can carry, can you afford to make a second trip back to the shop if you've forgotten something, and have to make conscious choices about what's possible and what's not possible within the limits of their energy. And I realized I've hardly ever seen that depicted in fiction. Not as a pity story and not as a look at the hero story, but the actual grind of that existence and how that can change how you relate to other people. So the reason why that's my cultural highlight is I hadn't seen that, and I thought it was psychologically really astute, particularly finding it embedded in something that's a much bigger and in places almost an adventure story. So, that's why that story stood out to me.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good observation that there are certain ways that we relate to people with disabilities culturally that do seem to fall into one of those two categories that you just talked about. Like they're either portrayed as victims or somehow super heroic.
Mm.
And I guess those are a couple of tropes that seem a little tired. So to read something that falls in between those two and is a more realistic depiction of the lived experience of that feels like something that would be a useful contribution to the literary landscape. My big cultural moment. Now, I think I'm going to keep this brief because it feels like there's so much I could say on this that this sort of deserves an episode, and maybe we'll do that in the future. But it's AI, artificial intelligence, and just the way in which it's kind of seeped into pretty much every corner of culture. In many ways for good. I think lots of people will say their life's been made easier, more convenient by AI, and in many ways for the not so good. I think in terms of the environmental damage being done by the enormous demand for power, the GPU chips that are required to run these systems. At a personal level, I was affronted by, well, you're the same, like the books that we've written have basically been stolen by AI companies
Mm-hmm.
to feed the beast. So there's some ethical concerns about it. And then I think there's the thing that people just don't seem to be talking about quite enough, which is the explicit stated aim of these tech companies, which is to arrive at artificial general intelligence. So to get to the point where we have an AI that is as good as a human at everything. And so whilst people are getting very excited about posting their action figure memes without a thought for the 10 bathtubs of water that might have taken to produce. People are not, I think, looking at where all of this might be heading. And so from the sort of psychological angle here is, I think, just the sort of propensity of humans to go for the smaller, sooner reward and not think about the larger, later cost. Very easy for us to get seduced by the bright, shiny new thing without thinking about where it might lead. It's a bit like the sort of, that it's a horrible idea, but that, the sort of boiling the frog analogy.
Yeah.
That if you just gently turn up the temperature of the water that the frog is in, the frog's not going to notice until the point that it's boiling. What we are doing is heading towards the creation of an intelligence that is superior to us. And without going into too much detail, because I do think this deserves an episode on its own, I can't quite believe that more people aren't more worried about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely with you, Rich. I think there's so much here to dive into because it strikes me AI is it's a source of threat and difficulty from a variety of ways. And I think from to psychologists' point of view, one of the things is the emerging evidence that the more people rely on these kind of auto summarizing features of things and write my essay for me, that there might actually be a real hit to cognitive development. In that it's not just that we get a bit lazy, we don't develop or maintain the skills. So yeah, I think there's a variety of challenges here, and we could probably populate more than one episode, but certainly one on the many risks and benefits of AI.
Okay, I'm going to channel my inner Alan Partridge now and invite you to keep it light as we turn our attention to entertainment. So, your entertainment moments of the year.
Oh, so many, and I think the one that I wanted to choose, in a sense, has been absolutely done to death because it became a real shared cultural moment for a lot of people, was the recent television series Celebrity Traitors. Now, I've not been a follower of the Traitors game show format before, and it may be that some of the people listening haven't come across it. It is basically a televised version of a large murder mystery party where a group of people are secluded in a castle and they are ostensibly generating an increased prize fund that one person at the end will win. The issue is that amongst those people, 3 people have been secretly chosen to be traitors who are unknown that that's what they are to the rest of the party. But between the 3 of them, choose every night to, in the terms of the game, murder, or basically evict one member of the group. And then the whole group, including, of course, those traitors who aren't known to the rest of the group, choose each day to banish somebody. They try and find a traitor and kick them out. So the days roll on, people are eliminated. The majority of the group are trying to work out who the traitors are. And here's a crucial bit on very little information. So this program happened. It happened with a bunch of celebrities, very well chosen celebrities, I think. And yeah, it was very successful and very entertaining. But a couple of really interesting things about it. So one of which it became that thing we so rarely see now, which is sort of a shared moment, and everybody wanted to watch it at the moment of broadcast. So everybody was shifting everything else around for, what we used to call appointment TV. I suppose all TV used to be appointment TV before streaming and recording. So everybody was watching at the same time, which is a fairly rare thing for non-sports events these days. Lots of people were talking about it. So sort of culturally, that was interesting because we don't see it as much anymore. Psychologically, I think the thing that really interested me was the whole process of how people make decisions and choices under conditions of high uncertainty and low information. And all that happened was people started generating stories and generating ideas of what they thought they were seeing, of what this must mean about this person. And then in groups beginning to try and work out who's in, who's out, who's more likely to be a traitor. And often making those choices on really kind of spurious basis. What you know about this person's previous life and career. But that was kind of pretty much irrelevant to whether the person was a traitor or not. So as the audience know who's who, who's traitor, who's not traitor, to us, and we see behind the scenes of them deciding who they're going to murder and what happens next, to the audience, it all seems really clear. And how on earth are these people being so dense as to miss all these cues? To the people in the middle of it, they have nothing to go on. They generate these ideas and then they just kind of take a life of their own. And that was one of the bits sort of psychologically I found most interesting about the whole thing. I don't know, did you watch that one, Rich?
Of course I watched it. As you were describing the mechanics of Traitors there, I was thinking, come on, Ray, you don't need to do this. Like, everybody has watched Traitors. Like, there can't be many people out there that haven't watched it. Generally speaking, I despise reality TV. Like, I think my free time is relatively short. I do like most of us, I like to kind of veg out on the sofa of an evening when I'm tired. And I don't want to spend my time watching rubbish. Like, I'm quite selective about what I watch. And so generally speaking, that doesn't include any reality TV. But this format is super compelling. Like, it is like when Big Brother first appeared. Like, there's something really interesting psychologically about the dynamics of this game that make it really, really compelling. Because one of the things I liked about the early Big Brother was just sort of seeing people's behind the scenes motivations that the other
Mm.
housemates couldn't see, because like you were privy to the diary room bits where you would see people talking to the camera about their true motivations. But there's something about this where you're deliberately casting people in the role of being sort of subversive and deviant and working against other people. And because you know who they are, it's just so fascinating. I think one of the things I would take away from that is just how bad people are at spotting when people are lying.
Mm.
Because it's just, when you're looking at it, it seems so obvious who the traitors are, and yet it's clearly not obvious at all. Two very, very clever, wise people who are immersed in this experience, seeing these other people for huge, lengths of
Yeah.
time each day, and they just can't see it.
And we perhaps shouldn't be surprised at that, given that that's what the data tells us. That's what psychological data tells us, is that, the myth of people being able to reliably spot when other people are lying is just the stuff of detective fiction, because it's a very convenient plot move. The actual data is humans are rubbish at doing that, because all of the panoply of, oh, this bit of nonverbal behavior means this and this means that, most of it's nonsense. What you can pick up when people are a bit stressed, but then you put people into a situation where everybody's a bit stressed and there is so much noise and so little signal.
This is maybe revealing something about myself. Like, do you? I'm looking for validation here. Do you secretly think I'd be really good at it?
Oh, of course. I think anybody would, wouldn't they? You've got to watch that and think, oh, I'd be great at that in either role.
They
It would
just
be
need
such a
me.
hoot.
I would be so good at it.
I did see one suggestion on social media that really intrigued me, of how you could change it and improve it. So what if you had exactly the same setup, but there were no traitors? Everybody thought 3 traitors had been chosen, and actually nobody was. The production team just randomly chose somebody to be eliminated each day. And then you would watch the stories evolve in the absolute absence of any signal. And my suspicion is the patterns would look exactly the same.
Yeah, they're going to have to do something. I think after a few series of this, they're going to have to mix it up somehow to kind of
Yeah.
keep it fresh. Yeah, but yeah, I suppose that would be my recommendation as well. I think if you're only ever going to watch one reality TV show, that's the one to watch. So for my entertainment moments, I could not choose, so I've cheated. I have broken the rules. I picked one TV show, one film, and one musical event. Those three forms of entertainment would be the things I spend most time around. So my TV show was Severance. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's on Apple TV. Just a fascinating psychological premise. So there is a company that you can go and work for on the severed floor, whereby your memory is wiped on the way in and the way out. The home version of you goes to work but has no idea what goes on at work. And when you're at work, you have no idea who you are on the outside. And so the story is that the main kind of protagonist, he very sadly loses his wife, and is so depressed and so bereaved that he just can't stand being alive, basically. And his solution, rather than suicide, is to go and work on the severed floor of this company so that he can at least spend 8 hours a day not having to think about life without his wife.
Wow.
And I'll leave it there. The premise is just so interesting. I guess for a psychology geek like me, it gets me just thinking about what would that be like. And there was just some really fascinating kind of dynamics that emerge from being in that situation. So that'd be my TV show.
Mhm.
Have you seen that?
I've not. I've heard so many positive things about it. I'm
Right.
sure that will change at some point.
Get it for a month and binge Severance.
And then just binge everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Watch Slow Horses while you're there. My film was the Ballad of Wallace Island, which was probably a fairly low budget British film. Just gorgeous, heart wrenching, hilarious, moving. about a guy, again, similar, bereaved, has lost his partner that he spent so many happy times with. He's a bit of a social outcast. He's got loads of money. And what he does is book a couple who are like a musical duo that him and his wife used to really love. He books them to do a private gig just for him on the island that he lives on. But the kind of twist is this couple were a couple, both musically and romantically, but then they've since split up. So he's bringing these two like exes back together to do this gig for him on this island. Yeah, it sounds like an
Wow.
odd idea for a film, but it's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And then my musical event, which I didn't even attend because I couldn't get a ticket, the demand was so high, but it was Black Sabbath's final gig, Back to the Beginning, at Villa
Oh,
Park.
okay.
So it was like a who's who of heavy metal, an all-day stadium event culminated in the last, well, it turns out to be the very last appearance of both Ozzy Osbourne as a solo artist and Black Sabbath as a band, because Ozzy died a couple of weeks afterwards.
Mm.
I couldn't get a ticket, so I spent whatever it was, 25 quid to get the online access, and I just sat on my sofa for the entire day watching the
Wow.
just sort of who's who of heavy metal.
And you would have had
Basically,
better snacks. You wouldn't have
better
had to worry
snacks.
about parking. Ooh,
Yeah,
better
no
view.
difficult
Perfect.
transport. No, not to worry about being stood behind the tall bloke that always seems to happen to me at gigs. Yeah, and it was just great 'cause, Black Sabbath, they basically invented heavy metal, and I think that doesn't happen very often, that there's a band that you can point to and think, "Well, they are basically responsible for this entire genre of music." And so I think whoever organised that gig just picked up the phones with the sort of glitterati of, rock music, and they all just said, "Yep, yep, yep, yep." So you had all of the, biggest names in rock were all there. It was, yeah, and it was just great. Fantastic.
And is that, like, the moment for you? Obviously, you really enjoyed it, but there must have been something about that that really made it resonate with you because, there's lots of great musicians around. We can hear them anytime. What was it about that happening then?
Well, there's the link to Birmingham, I suppose, because the Black Sabbath, people don't know, are from Birmingham. There's a great cultural pride in Black Sabbath around the city, and there's various sort of Black Sabbath monuments and things around the city. So there's that connection. So on a sort of personal level, I've always loved Black Sabbath as a band, and I've always loved that kind of music. And sort of knowing that it was probably going to be their last gig ever, there was just something very special about that. It's a sort of defining
Mm,
moment in history. But I think I'd just go back to what I was saying before, really. It's like rarely, I mean, there aren't many bands or artists that you can point to and think they are pretty much single handedly responsible for the creation of an entire genre of music.
mm,
And I know people sort of look down a bit on heavy metal and just, "Oh, it's just a load of noise," or "You can't understand the words," or all the kinds of things that people say about it. But it is a form of music that just means an awful lot to an enormous number of people.
mm.
And particularly, I think people who feel a bit isolated or a bit excluded or a bit on the edge of things. And I
Mm.
guess I've felt like that, I suppose, at various times in my life. And so it's just that thing, I suppose, of being part of a tribe. We all need that, don't we? We all need to feel like we're part of something. And I think
Yeah,
a lot of people who are into their loud guitars and rock music, there's something quite, yeah, there's a community around it, which is nice.
excellent.
Okay, where are we? So our last category then. So sport. So what was your sporting moment of 2025?
I think I may have briefly mentioned this on a previous episode, but in September, I was lucky enough to be at the semi-final of the Women's Rugby World Cup, which was held in Britain this year. So I was down in Bristol at Ashton Gate watching the Red Roses, England women's team, play France in the semi-final. It was a pretty good game. It was a bit one-sided. Other matches were tighter within the tournament. But it was it was a resounding victory for your team, as it were. But it was mainly the atmosphere. Place was full, sold out. It's kind of a very positive feeling, and also so many women and young girls who were there, loving it, seeing role models. And particularly one of the things in rugby is, we've always said, it's a game for all shapes and sizes. And so we had people who are superb athletes who were not conforming to what a sort of like a male dominated view of what optimum female body shape is. We have people there who are there to be wrecking balls, and we have people who are there to be gazelles. And all of them were being celebrated for their achievements, and also were very active in things like social media to sort of present themselves as rounded people, to demonstrate, I guess, to a whole new generation of young people, girls and boys, that this sport, which has its problems, has its downsides, can be a real source of psychological well-being, and a bit like you're saying with heavy metal, can be a real sort of source of community as well. So yeah, it was just a great, great feeling to be there.
You've had a bit of involvement professionally with women's rugby, have you not?
I did. I did briefly spend a short period of time as psychologist to a professional women's rugby team at the behest of a long-term friend of the show, Lydia Thompson, ex-rugby player in England, winger, who got me involved in a local women's rugby team. It was a fascinating time. I learnt so much.
It is great, isn't it? It is great to see women's sport attracting some of the same levels of attention as men's sport. Because my moment was similar. So my moment was the Lionesses winning the European Championship in football for the second time running. The story here is that I found myself, for reasons I won't go into, at a holiday park near Scarborough in Yorkshire. The whole time I was there, I was a little bit anxious about, like, will I get to watch the match, right? And so I did a bit of research, found that there was a sort of pub and they had a screen. So I went down a day before and said, will you be showing the match? And I was also, we had some plans for the day, and I was like, what time are we going to need to get back in order to be able to get a chance of getting in and getting a seat? So I was asking the guy, so, do you think you'll be busy? And he was like, the sort of typical chauvinistic attitude. He was like, that's not football, is that? And he said, he was saying, oh, I think you'll be fine. I don't think anyone will be in here to watch that. And it was absolutely rammed. And so it was just lovely because there were just, families there on holiday. So people of all ages, all the grandparents and the little kids are running around in this big holiday park pub, big screen. And there were groups of lads as well, but everyone's in there, and it was just a really sort of raucous atmosphere. And it was just like watching a men's match. And I think that for women's football to have achieved that kind of long overdue, right? Let's not kind of gloss over it in terms of the horrible kind of ostracism. Is that a word?
It is now.
That women were just sort of not allowed to be part of the formal football structures for many years. So, good job that's been put right. But to see women's sport at that kind of level, and I'm just thinking, I'm reflecting on this moment now, to see two relatively old men both taking a lot of joy in the rise of women's sport. I think that's a wonderful thing, right? And for young people to see women being celebrated for playing sports like rugby and football, that just gives me a lot of joy and a lot of hope for the future.
I mean, one of the things that struck me in this conversation was thinking about when women's sport wasn't around so much, what women's sports were shown. Well, there was tennis, gymnastics, athletics disciplines. It was actually my wife who pointed out to me, said, when she was growing up, she said, yeah, that's what was on TV. You'd see that. And she said to her, it never occurred to her that everything else was men. It wasn't that we're all the women's sports. It was almost like the question couldn't exist, because other than those very little islands, well, clearly sport was a man thing. And so being able to say, well, actually, look, and it's not just that, is it? Women's cricket's building. It's nice to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, long may that continue. Okay, so I'm gonna include an any other business category. So is there anything you wanna highlight as being a kind of, one of your top moments of the year that doesn't necessarily fit into the above categories?
Okay, I have a foodie moment of the year.
Does it involve mushrooms?
No, almost, but not. I ended up having a dish that I kind of fancied for a few years, but I hadn't had the opportunity to try. It's a very specific dish from a specific bit of Italy. Okay, so near Verona, which is a really beautiful city. I've been lucky enough to be there a couple of times. They produce a lot of nice wine around there, including a very distinctive, strong flavored red wine called Amarone. And locally, there's this dish called risotto al Amarone. In this place, instead of cooking it in normal stock, they cook it in this red wine. And I'd heard people say, actually, that's really, really nice, but you don't get it many places. So I'd fancied trying it. Because of reasons, hadn't had the opportunity to. Got the chance to earlier this year. And why am I mentioning this as a high spot? A, it was every bit as good as I'd hoped it would be. But actually, it was an incredibly simple dish. So very simple components end up giving you this incredibly complex flavour. Take a forkful of that and there's a lot going on in your mouth. It is quite the experience. That's one thing to say about it. But the other thing is, it looks...
I can't let that pass. That is a tagline on a poster somewhere, isn't it? Take a mouthful. No, I forgot. It was so good. You've bamboozled me. Take a forkful of that. There's a lot for. I can't say it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Take a forkful of that. There's a lot going on in your mouth. That has got to be a tagline for some food somewhere. So we'll give that to the world. Advertisers, marketers out there, you can have that.
Yeah, that's basically kind of Michelin review, isn't it? The other thing I was going to say about it, though, is actually one of the most interesting things I've tasted, really delicious. It looks hideous. Right? It looks like basically a purple cow pat. It's gross to look at. And, they're a restaurant, so they give you like bits of shaved parmesan around the edge. But it's just this thing that, like, if you saw it in a cow's field, somebody would need to call a vet. And yet, one of the most delicious things I've tasted. And it backed up a friend of mine who'd lived in Italy who said, like, rule one of an Italian restaurant is the more attractive the food looks, the less interesting it tastes. And the good stuff always looks a mess. So I found the absolute apex of that in risotto al Amarone, which I hugely recommend.
Regular listeners will know that I periodically give you grief about the mushroom thing since you started growing your own hideous looking mushrooms. And I started to worry about whether the end of the world might be coming. I think we should just close the loop on this because on your recommendation, I read that book about mushrooms by Merlin Sheldrake. And then the two of us went to see the guy, didn't we? Went to see him talk. And it was fantastic, really fascinating.
It was amazing, wasn't it? It was quite the production, beautiful graphics. It's quite poetic the way he talked about mushrooms and fungus and the part they play in our lives. So I'm glad it inspired you to come along.
So I think we can officially put this to bed. I hereby commit to never making fun of you about mushrooms and fungi again because we've won me over, and yeah, you've sort of taken the rug from underneath me there, and now I'm on board with your strange fungi enthusiasm, which might be because you secretly fed me something and it's slowly burrowing its way into my brain.
Yeah, that's the most logical conclusion. Yeah.
So I'm going to have any other business as well. So I'm not going to give you too much detail other than to say that I very recently took a 2-week holiday for the first time. I mean, definitely since the pandemic. Yeah, possibly a year or two before that. And I'm just going to put a big shout out there for taking a 2-week holiday.
Right.
Like a proper, if you can, I mean, I'm obviously very fortunate enough to be able to do this, but if you can, take yourself away from the place that you live, go and spend some time somewhere else, doesn't really matter where it is, and go for 2 weeks. I'd forgotten just how reinvigorating doing that is. And that, I don't know, if, maybe it's me, maybe it's not everyone, but like it took me probably the first week to sort of wind down and just to get used to the fact that I didn't have to live life at quite such a pace, the pace that you do when you're working in this sort of society. I could physically, it was like a visceral thing. I could physically feel myself slowing down after about 5 or 6 days. And I kind of thought, well, if I'd have been just away for a week, I'd have only felt that for a day or so, and I'd have been back into it. So yeah, if you are fortunate enough to be able to, I'd recommend taking a 2-week break. And if you're means don't allow that, then just take as much of a break as you can. It's good for us.
And to ask you that question that us psychologists often ask, if I'd been in the room with you there in the middle of that second week, what would I have seen that was different?
Well, it's interesting. I was literally walking more slowly, making decisions more slowly, I think probably speaking more slowly, just feeling like less of a pressure to do stuff, being a bit more in the moment, I think. And as someone who spends a lot of time kind of living up in my head, I guess the nature of the job in many ways, it's about quite an intellectual academic pursuit. And I suppose it's a bit like I was sort of having to get a taste of my own medicine, I suppose. The number of times I've recommended to clients to try and be more mindful, to slow things down, to be more present. It's one of my favorite kind of between session activities to invite clients to do is to just
Mm.
think of one thing that you do on a routine basis and try and do it at half speed.
Mm.
Just bring a more present, focused, more mindful quality to some mundane everyday task. So, just slow down doing the dishes and then I kind of felt like I'm a bit of a hypocrite because this is some new revelation to me. Like I'm suddenly on holiday realizing, oh, this slowing down stuff is good. Who knew? But yeah, it, yeah. As I'm talking, I'm thinking maybe not everyone needs a 2-week holiday. Maybe it's just people like me who find it hard to slow down. That actually, to be put in a situation where you just don't have so much of a kind of imperative to do anything.
Well,
Yeah.
that does point to a context thing, doesn't it? I mean, we do, with good intent and with good evidence behind us, invite people to do these things between their weekly sessions in the midst of living busy lives and doing their job and coping with health crises and whatever. And what you noticed was, yeah, and sometimes that's difficult. Suppose it takes a while to walk up to that. So yeah, it's a good reminder for me to not be kind of frustrated if people aren't managing stuff between sessions, because sometimes the rest of the context pulls you away.
Yeah. Reminds me of that old injunction, that you should do an hour of mindfulness a day unless you're too busy, in which case you should do 2. Okay, so that was 2025. I think it won't go down as a vintage year. I think there's not an awful lot to recommend it. There were some peaks, but yeah, quite a lot of troughs as well.
I find
So
my gloomy palliative care mentality kicking in, Rich, with the phrase, there might come a day when you give anything to be back in 2025.
yeah, there you go. Sneaking in a little reference to the end of life as you as you like to do. Somebody came up to me at a conference and said they'd been listening to the podcast and said that I can't remember exactly the context, but they said that I think they were fondly thought of you as Death Ray.
Very good. Very good. I think I need the T-shirt.
I thought so. I thought that was good. Right, you ready for your question?
Oh, I am.
It's a biggie.
Let's go and ask Ray, shall we?
So a question comes from Kim Gardner, who is a keen listener to the show and self-confessed music fan. And like this question is so good that I can't believe we haven't done it already. It is, what is your favourite song and why? Now, listeners, Ray is looking puzzled. He's staring off into the distance. It's clearly not going to be an easy task, this. I did think this would be a difficult one. Can't rush into this, can you?
Exactly. What was going on inside my head was, several candidates bubbling up and then me making all these choices about, oh, that's too obscure or that's going to sound bad or whatever. So, simple answer, but it is obscure. Big Genesis fan. Early loves in music, and I particularly love their kind of complex prog rockness. And there is a song, a track called The Firth of Fifth, which is very grandiose and operatic and loads going on. So that's an absolute favourite of mine, but probably not that recognisable to most people. So if I had to choose a track that people might actually have heard of, I'd possibly say Blackbird by the Beatles.
Nice. That is a great choice. So, just going back there, it was called the Firth of Fifth,
Yeah.
as in like the Firth of Fourth, but the Firth of Fifth.
Yeah. It's a song about the metaphorical power of rivers.
Aren't all the best songs about, about the metaphorical
I
power of
mean, deep
rivers?
down, they probably are.
Okay, so we've got the
What would yours?
Firth of Fifth by Genesis and
Yeah.
Blackbird by the Beatles.
Yeah.
Blackbird by the Beatles. That's a beautiful, beautiful song.
Yeah. And used beautifully in the final episode of Gavin and Stacey as well. Somebody sings a cover version
Oh,
of it just on guitar, and it's just the sweetest thing.
I've long wanted to be able to play that on the guitar. I can play it, but I can't sing at the same time. It's challenging for someone who's with rudimentary guitar skills such as mine.
So if the question were reversed, and given you've had longer to think about this,
Well, I have had a long time to think about this, and to be honest, Ray, I've been thinking about nothing else. It's a tough question, isn't it? It's not easy at all. So I'm glad you've cheated and you've named two, so because that sort of gives me permission to do the same. I'll go for the obscure one first. Then I want to preface this by saying, like, this is a wider issue that, again, I think we could almost make an episode out of. I do think there's in mainstream music there's a sort of cultural stagnation occurring. One of the things that's a symptom of that is that no one's into bands anymore. And I really like bands. Like, I love going to see a band. Like, I'm not interested in going to see a singer who's just a singer and a producer. So the singer's just up there with singing to a backing track. No interest in that. I like to see a proper, old school band. I want to see a group of musicians up there doing their thing. And I think there's all sorts of reasons why, mostly sort of commercially, financially driven reasons why record companies don't seem interested in bands anymore. And the bands that I liked, of the contemporary bands that are around now, so, young people, what I notice when I go to see them is that the audience is largely people like me. It's other older people who like bands. And I think if this band had been around when I was young, they'd have been absolutely massive. And I can't understand why they are not bigger than they are. But yeah, it seems like bands are just not really a thing. My song, so there's a band who, like Kim actually, from Liverpool, called Red Rum Club. They are just fantastic. And I think they just craft the most, indie flavoured, I suppose, but just a pop song. This is why I can't understand why they're not massive. The songs are so great, so accessible. And so the one I'm going to choose is a song called Ballerino. It's just like a perfect pop song.
I shall go away and listen.
You should do that. If I was going to have just one song that I was allowed to listen to forever, it would be I Am the Resurrection by the Stone Roses. So, back in the day, 1989, the Stone Roses debut album came out, and what a brilliant slice of pop music that was. And like, they never bettered it. They never got over how brilliant their first album was. Lots of other bands came in the sort of wake of them who never got anywhere close to the sort of genius of that moment. Yeah, I Am the Resurrection. So it's sort of like two songs in one. It's just a sort of pretty ordinary kind of indie pop song, and then it changes into this just amazing guitar solo, really like funky guitar solo. And so the whole thing is probably 9 minutes long. It's just amazing. I just remember the first time I heard that, I was like, what is this? This is unreal. And yeah. And I was always really frustrated that if I was ever at like a disco or at a club or whatever back in the day, they'd never play the end bit. They'd just play the first bit. And like the really dancey, cool, funky guitar bit at the end, they never played. So I have given instructions that I would like this song to be played at my funeral, and all 9 minutes have to be played, and no one is allowed to leave until it's finished.
That's an excellent plan.
I think I'm going to need a double slot at the crematorium because I've got a few other musical choices that I want in there as well.
It's the equivalent of the full Requiem Mass. That is just a Spotify playlist.
So, good question though, right?
Excellent question. I will now go away and agonize over what I should have said instead.
Okay, so thank you, Kim, for your question, and thanks for your support for the podcast. Much appreciated. That is us. That was 2025, and we will take our traditional winter recess and go away for a little bit, regroup, and we've got some exciting ideas for 2026. So we'll be back with a bang at some point in the new year. But for everybody else listening, have a wonderful Christmas and a very, very happy new year. Anything you'd like to say to our adoring public, Ray?
Thank you for listening. Look forward to being with you again soon.
Okay, and you take care, mate. I look forward to seeing you in the new year.
You will that. All right. See you then. Bye.
Bye-bye.